Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm here with Leslie John, a professor at Harvard Business School, and we are here to talk about her new book, Revealing, and the science of whether you should overshare or undershare or something in between. So, first question is one that I think I'm a little bit of an oversharer, and something I think about a lot is why does it feel risky to share more than just like small talk? So,
Mhm.
when I'm at the playground, my toddler's playing, I'm talking to other moms, it's almost always like the weather, where our kids are in daycare, when we move to this area, like
Yeah.
very, very surfacey stuff. Why does it feel riskier to go beyond that?
Yes. Lots of reasons. One of them is that when we do go a little far, say something a little cringy, we get immediate negative social feedback, like someone cringes. And that really hurts, the negative social feedback we get when we go a little bit past the line. And we remember that, right? We live in fear of that. And because we dread that feeling, we tend to censor ourselves. The tricky thing, though, is that someone can have a cringy, like my cringy faces, someone can have a cringy reaction, but also admire you for it. They can also feel like they trust you more. And those benefits, you don't get that visceral social feedback in the way you do the negative ones. So we overreact in a way. Um, it's interesting though. I love that example you gave. I can very much relate to it. You're on the playground, like this person seems nice, and you're just kind of in this annoying, superficial small talk. And I have found that if you go one step further, one level deeper, it can be much more interesting and fun, and you get out of that kind of small talk rut. And so, how do you do that? What does it mean? One thing you can do is instead of, we often sort of comment on the situation, like the kids are having fun, oh, they're smiling. If you go one step further by saying what it means to you, for example, you see the kids are smiling and laughing, you say, they're smiling and laughing. Huh, I don't remember the last time I had a good belly laugh. Right? So that's just like that's not oversharing. That's what I mean by going one step further. And then they'll probably reciprocate with something interesting themselves. If they don't, you can ask them a question. You can say, "When's the last time you had a belly laugh?" And you're kind of off to the races.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Kind of like getting a little bit meta out from a small talk
Yeah, that's
topic.
another way to say it too. Oh,
Yeah. So I was wondering how different cultures feel about oversharing because some background on me, I'm Russian and I've noticed that when I talk to an American, but I think culturally I'm more American. When I talk to an American, I get like a list of facts about their life, right? Like when they moved, how like what they
okay.
do, how old their kids are, where their kids go to school. Like and when I talk to a Russian for like 5 to 7 minutes, I get like their deepest trauma. Like they're just some, like, really challenging thing that happened to them recently. I just think it's, like, culturally a different thing, like, we just
Mhm,
expect we expect conversations to go different culture we're from. I'm wondering if
mhm.
that's, like, actually true or just something I'm making up based on an anecdotal experience.
I think that's fascinating. There are pretty big cultural differences in openness. And one of the things that explains these differences is the collectivism versus individualism spectrum, which is probably the best way of thinking about cultural differences, like the most robust, but it certainly doesn't begin to capture all the nuance. But in general, cultures that are more collectivist, they tend to be more reserved with self-disclosure. It's less contextually appropriate to go up to a stranger and kind of go deeper than it is in more individualistic cultures. And so it's funny because when I wrote the book proposal and my wonderful agent was trying to sell it in different countries. In Japan, the agent sent me this like apologetic email. We sent out your amazing book to proposal to 14 different publishers and all but one passed. And then they're like, when you think about it, the Japanese, they're much more reserved. And so the concept of oversharing to them is very off putting. And so that was a real lesson for me. And that actually prompted me to learn more about cultural differences in self disclosure.
What are some contexts in which it might be wise to share more than we usually do or might be initially inclined to? And I'm thinking specifically about like something like the playground or the office, in a friendship or something. Like, where are places where you find that like really saying more is more valuable?
I actually think when my gut reaction to your question is almost every context. And I'll give you specific examples, but writing the book was really such an amazing experience for me. It was kind of the therapy I didn't know I needed, where I all these principles that some of them I had learned in my research, but others I uncovered in others' research, and kind of I knew it as a scientist. But it wasn't until I wrote the book that I actually internalized the stuff and started using it myself. And so I would just keep practicing and trying out new things. And almost everything I did that was revealy went over well. Like, for example, there was one time I actually was inspired by reading your book because your book is like an experiment, right? And so
Yeah.
as I was writing my book, I was reading that. I'm like, and so like one of them was that there was a acquaintance of my husband's, and we went out for dinner and I was talking to his wife, and I thought, like, I really like this woman. Normally I wouldn't say that, but I just said to her, I really like you. And now we're really good friends. And it's like I never would have how like you in the past I'd be like, I seem needy, or no, I just like the person. And so now I kind of go, as my grandmother would say, nutty noodle, like with compliments. Now I'm just like, I praise people. And in academia, that's super weird. So I'm at work right now and we're, conservative academic. I mean, this is a weird looking office because I made it my own, but academics are very stingy with praise. And I just go around praising people and they don't really know what to do about it, but they like it. Here's another context where I think that we massively undershare actually without even realizing it. And that's in long term relationships. So, oftentimes, long term relationships, marriages, I would dare say that they don't usually end by some catastrophic, horrible event, like an affair or something. Sometimes that happens. But I think more often the culprit is something more insidious that emerges over time. And that is that we stop sharing. What
Hmm.
do I mean by that? Well, so when the longer you're with your partner, the more you know them. That's true. The problem, though, is your confidence that you know them outsizes your actual knowledge. So when you're overconfident that you know what they're thinking and feeling, what happens? You stop asking, you stop being curious, you assume you know, and that's where the problem begins. Studies have found this, that the better partners know each other and are able to understand their feelings and predict their feelings, the other partners, the stronger their relationships. And yet we're quite bad at it. So in studies, when they have couples who've loved each other, they're like for 10, 20 years, they bring them into the lab and they ask them to talk about something that's a little conflictual for them. And then they ask each other to write down what they thought and felt and to predict the other. And something like 80% of the time you guess wrong,
Hmm.
right? So that's a real problem. But the great news is that the way we can get around it is by sharing more, specifically sharing our feelings, right? And I think about it like in my own marriage, a day in the life, I'd wake up, roll over in bed and say, good morning. But what I wouldn't say is, I slept badly, I feel like shit. When I don't sleep badly, I can't regulate my emotions. I wouldn't say that. And then like down 10 minutes later in the kitchen, he's packing the kids' lunches and he says, what do they want for snack? And what do they want for snack? I say, I don't know. Stop asking me, right? It's never about the stupid snacks. If I had said to him, look, I'm exhausted. I can't, I have no bandwidth. If I just said that, he's so understanding and he would have given me grace. There's a construct, we psychologists love scales and traits, and there's one trait called mind reading expectations, and that is, as it sounds, it's this belief that your partner should just know your needs and just know what you're thinking and feeling, which, as I say it out loud, again, nutty noodle, of course people can't read each other's minds, but it's a very insidious thing, right? You kind of act as if that's true. And so we have a scale to measure this, and I discovered that scale when I was writing the book, and I took it myself, and I realized that I have super high off the chart mind reading expectations. And when I realized that, I realized, oh, I just need to tell Colin that I feel lousy. I just need to tell him that please give me a hug. I don't need problem solving. I need validation, or whatever it is. And sure enough, people that have high mind reading expectations, it's associated with lower relationship satisfaction. But again, there's a way to fix it. Revealing.
Yeah. I was really struck by, among other things in the book, the study finding that people like to date who revealed more, not less.
Mm.
So even though you think like on a first date, I should only talk about very light, kind of surfacey stuff. Like people actually liked the date who said something like, I've
Yeah.
struggled with depression or something. Why is it sometimes like beneficial to reveal rather than conceal? Like, you mentioned trust and liking and admiration. Talk about why that happens when we reveal.
Oh, we did this study that really changed the way I think about it because what the study showed, to your point, is that sometimes it's better to say really bad things about yourself, to admit to bad things, than to refuse to answer questions. So in this study, what we did was if you were a participant, I would be asking you which of two people you'd rather go on a date with. Okay, so two eligible suitors. Who would you rather go on a date with? Now, suppose that you talk to both of them, and the first one you talk to, and you say to them, have you ever had any STDs? Now, you're not going to lead with that, but you're busy people. So I'm boiling it down for you as we did in the study. So imagine you ask them that, and the first person says, I've had so many. I've lost count of how many I had. Not good, obviously. But the other person, you ask them and they say, I'm not telling you. And what we found is that again and again, people chose the revealer over the hider. Now, it's not your first choice of everyone in the world, but if you had to choose, who would you choose? Again and again, we found that people chose the revealer. They'd rather date someone, they'd rather hire someone, they'd rather sit next to the subway beside someone who comes clean rather than someone who conspicuously doesn't answer your questions. And what we realized is it's because of trust, because when you think about it, revealing something sensitive is a social risk. And that's the way you show you trust someone because you can't just say, I trust you or you can trust me. That's cheap talk. The way you build trust is by actually making yourself vulnerable. And the way humans do that is taking a social risk via self disclosure, for example. So when I share something sensitive with you, it's like I'm relinquishing control to the universe and I'm showing I trust you. I'm implicitly saying I trust you not to make a fool out of me. In turn, you trust me more. And that's so incredibly important for human relationships, which are so important for human flourishing, that when someone abstains from this trust building activity, when they say, I'm not answering, we view them with contempt. We distrust them so much so that we'd rather, again, date someone and so on who admits to bad things relative to someone who just decides not to open up at all.
Wow, interesting. And, that surprises me because I would think that you would like someone less if they shared something negative about
Yeah,
themselves.
I would think
But
so too.
but that is not what you're finding.
It's not what we found. I mean, again, it's not the number one choice. You'd rather the person preferably not have had STDs, or at least
Sure.
then the follow-up question, did you get treated? Whatever. Sorry, I'm going too much down that road. Um, but the really interesting thing to me was that, like, the person who abstains, there's lots of reasons why they're abstaining. It could be that they're saying this is an unreasonable question, right? A principled abstainer. But we don't, I feel like it's a very primal thing we do where it's just this like knee jerk gut reaction that is based on a smart thing because making relationships is important. And so it's this like global negative trait character inference we make when someone doesn't reveal. Another thing relatedly that kind of changed my thinking and made me think, well, the problem is not oversharing. The problem is actually undersharing is twofold. One, we did other studies in this same series where we put people in the situation of possibly revealing. We're like, okay, you're asked. Imagine you failed a test in college and a new employer asks you, have you ever failed any tests? Do you say you've failed the test or do you opt out of answering? We didn't let them lie. So do you say yes or do you opt out of answering? And people are like, oh, I'm opting out of answering for sure. But yet it's the wrong choice because then we showed employers, we're like, okay, obviously you'd rather someone who's never failed, but if you had to choose, who would you choose? And like 80% choose the person who admits to the thing. So our intuition is wrong when we're doing it. And there's another powerful stream of research that really affected me, which is when neuroscientists put people in brain scanners in fMRI machines, they looked at what areas of their brain were activated when they answered personal questions. So they gave them personal questions like what's your favorite ice cream flavor or some opportunities to reveal something. And they found that when people got those questions that asked them to reveal, the pleasure centers of the brain were activated as opposed to when they asked them questions that were mere trivia questions, not about their personal preferences. And so that to me is really fundamental. Right? The same area that's activated during sex is activated to an extent when you reveal. And so that really shook me because, nature has a way of making pleasurable things that are important for us to be doing. So that was another thing that really, really changed my thinking.
I was wondering if we could talk about the risks of over disclosure because you have this
Mm.
example in the book of someone who tells an acquaintance, not a close friend, about like a situation where like there's only one first class ticket and like two people are
Oh,
flying somewhere, and so she tells her husband, if you give me the first class ticket, I'll give you a blowjob later. And the friend was like really, or the acquaintance was really put off by this. I don't know that that would have like bothered me that much. I would have been like, that's a weird thing to say, but I wouldn't have like cut that person off. Well, can you talk a little bit about like why that was too much and what is the line
yeah.
between like
Yeah.
just enough and too much?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think it was, yeah, I love that story. I think it was too much because it was out of the blue. It was like this giant step. And if you think about, especially in new relationships, people are exquisitely sensitive to the kind of disclosure dance you're doing, the back and forth. You don't want to take too big of a step. So you start off making small talk, talking about how good the champagne is, and then it's like blowjobs on an airplane. That's
Yeah.
that's like way like giant. And so the rule of thumb there is when you're with a new acquaintance is to match their level of disclosure, or the next level move is to go a little bit deeper, right? So you're talking about champagne, maybe you say, "Oh, I don't know, what would be one for to talk about champagne? Like a couple weeks ago, I went out. It was wonderful. We had the most wonderful champagne. I was celebrating my mother's 80th birthday or whatever. I mean, that's still kind of boring, but you can see like it's a little bit of personal, right? And then you could even then if the person is pretty socially adept and open, they're going to reciprocate. So they're going to match you on that or go a little bit deeper. If they don't, you can ask them a question. You can say like, "When's the last time you celebrated something with champagne?" The way I said it was like very cheesy, but you know what I mean? So that's how it's like this dance. You want to get deeper, but you want to do it together and gradually.
You said something interesting, which is I remember like last weekend we went out and celebrated my mom's or grandmother's 80th birthday with champagne, and you were like, that's still kind of boring. I also find that boring. Like, why is small talk so boring? Like, because if you think about it, like it's mostly what we do. So like, why do we find it so boring?
Well, it's boring because there's no risk in it. I think what makes talk interesting and deep and meaningful is the risk. And that's kind of the paradox because with risk comes reward, but risk sucks. Um
Yes.
and but I do think as a behavioral scientist, I know that there are cognitive biases we have that make us be overly conservative, to make us undershare. If we go back to this idea of the overreaction to risk, right? When something, the negative impact of revealing, we feel that viscerally. We live in fear of it, and so then we never go deeper, and then so we never get practice going further. We never get practice appreciating the benefits of going a little bit deeper. And often it's the stuff. So the champagne, the last time I celebrated, I think one of the reasons, in general, so a lot of I've done a lot of studies that where I rank kind of the sensitivity of different topics because I'm always trying to get the right questions for the right study, how sensitive. And generally, there's a very strong correlation between the sensitivity of a topic and its negativity. The more negatively valent stuff is inherently more risky, it's inherently more sensitive, but that's also where the magic is. Like, so for example, I was just teaching this morning and I start class with this exercise. It was especially fun because they didn't know me at all. So I was coming in cold and I assign half of them to ask and answer one question with the partner beside them and half of them ask and answer another question. The one question is today it was, how far did you travel to get here? The other question was, when is the last time you cried? And when I first assigned the question, the people that get the crying question, they're like, oh, they're groaning. They're not happy about it. But then by the powers vested in me as a Harvard professor, when I forced them to do it, they love it. And then I ask them at the end, raise your hand if it was meaningful. Everyone goes up. If it was interesting, hand go up. If it was fun, hands go up. Like it was fun even talking about the last time they cried. So it's one of those things that our intuition is kind of wonky. And that's why I really do think that doing is believing in this case.
I want to talk about social reappraisal and why it's so
Ooh.
powerful. This actually just I saw a demonstration of this just yesterday. I was having like kind of a panicky spiral about something, and I have this friend who I call when I'm in a panicky spiral, and she's always like, "Think of it this way," or like, "Here's another way to look at it," or like, "It could, here's like my take on it." And I find that so soothing, and it's so much almost like works so much better for me than like
Mm.
therapy where they're like, "What happened in your childhood that like made you feel this way or whatever?" And so so first of all, maybe define what it is and talk about why it's so powerful.
Yes. So, social reappraisal is when you say something that's bothering you and the person you're talking to helps you think about it in a different way. And that's really powerful because having someone else say it to you makes it more credible. It gives you perspective. And so studies have looked at what is the best thing for your friend, your partner, your therapist, ChatGPT to say in response to you. What is the best kind, most helpful kind of social reappraisal? The number one thing is simply validation, is simply saying, that sucks. I hear you. That must have been so hard. Those, they seem kind of fluffy and vacuous and woo woo, those statements, but oh my gosh, they're so effective. And sometimes when we're receiving people's disclosures, we think, okay, I need to problem solve, I need to fix it. But like 90% of the action is in validation, is just making, like, listening out loud, essentially. If you want to go beyond that, studies have also looked at different types of social reappraisal. So, different types of things beyond validation. One strategy, for example, is bright siding, they called. So, if the partner says, "Oh, yeah, that's true. That's right." Validation, but think on the bright side because blah, blah, blah. Bright siding. Another one is the old this too shall pass. I hear you. That really sucks. Remember that you're not always going to feel this way. So they tested a variety of things like this, and they found that in addition to validation of these strategies, the most effective was the old this too shall pass. Better than bright siding, better than the other strategies. And I thought about this when I found this out because when we had our first baby just before, people are often very eager to give advice
Yes.
for better and for worse. And my cousin said to me, I'm going to just give you one piece of advice, and I want you to say it out loud. She like made me say it. She said, "This too shall pass."
Yeah.
And, and it really, like, it's like
Mhm.
4 a.m. I'm like bobbing on the thing, trying to like giving it boobs, like whatever. And I said, "This too shall pass." And it really, really is helpful, like reminding yourself. But even
Mhm.
if you don't have someone like a social reappraiser, the act of taking what's in your brain, the feelings swirling around, the thoughts, and putting them onto paper, making them words, that act, again, it seems like not a very consequential thing, but that act of translating what's swirling around into words is very therapeutic because it imposes a kind of logical structure. When you have to put it into words, it's engaging the more coherent prefrontal cortex part of your brain, the more logical part of your brain. So it's kind of like you become the CEO of your thoughts and feelings when you do this. And then, of course, when you write it down or if you say something out loud, you're also the way we communicate, the strong norms of communication are such that we naturally impose a story structure, right? We naturally impose some kind of sense to it. And that also is very therapeutic because it makes the thing we're worrying about more concrete, more certain, less uncertain. And uncertain is, of course, the source of all anxiety. And what I love about this is that you don't even have to try. You don't have to be like, I have to make sense of this. I have to like therapize myself, whatever. You
Mhm.
just have to put the things into words.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I love this too shall pass. My favorite thing with anything baby related is the Buddhist maxim everything ends.
Oh,
For those like, my god, my life is now like being a boob monster who like stays up all night. Looking at a professional context, like I think that is one of the trickiest places to find the line between over and undersharing because you do want to be not fired for being just like wild and
correct.
crazy with your
Yes.
overshares, but also
Yes.
like you do want to connect with your colleagues and your boss and
Yeah.
have them
Yeah.
see you as a whole person. So can you talk about discerning authenticity and how to balance like over and undersharing at work?
Yeah, one distinction that I have found helpful is a distinction that my colleague at NYU, Juliana Pillemer, has come up with, which is the difference between transparency and vulnerability. So, transparency she refers to as cognitive openness, sharing the way your brain works, sharing the way your thoughts work, your thinking patterns. Vulnerability, on the other hand, is more sensitive, more risky, but also higher reward, but also more risky. And that's like sharing, typically sharing feelings or sharing sensitive thoughts. And what my general takeaway from this is that transparency is quite safe. You get a lot of bang for your buck. And so if in doubt, I think transparency is kind of the name of the game, the trick. Vulnerability, there is a time and place for it too, but vulnerability you need to be a lot more careful about, you know, is your recipient going to be someone who is helpful, compassionate, whatever, a good recipient. And so that's where you need to be a little more careful, especially if we're often navigating being higher status and lower status, the same person on a given day. And so when we're in a higher status position, we have a lot more leeway. And that's where vulnerability, sharing a little bit of what you're working on with your colleagues or your employees or your direct reports. I'm working on my time management skills. That's wonderful. That's vulnerability. It makes them trust you more because you're human. It makes them want to work for you more. It makes them more motivated. It also, if you want their feedback, it elicits accurate feedback from them. So if you're
Mm.
asking for 360 feedback, this is study out of Wharton, Constantine Koutafaris and the Adam Grant. Um, what they did was they randomized leaders to either do the usual request for 360 feedback by saying, please tell me your honest opinions, I can take it, versus here are some things I'm working on, basically modeling vulnerability. And what they found was it was only the people who showed they could take it by modeling it that actually got useful feedback. The old, please tell me you can trust me was not very effective. Now, when you are not occupying a higher status position, the vulnerability I think is much riskier. But even still, there can be a space for it. But I think transparency is kind of a nice go-to. And there have been studies that have looked at even in job interviews. So when you're being interviewed for a new job, that is a very high stakes competitive situation where we typically would think we should not, there's no space for opening up. Even then, studies have found that among those who are qualified for jobs, so if you're applying to the job that you're qualified for, being a little bit more a little bit more open, showing how you're thinking, how your brain works, the way you think, that can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think job interviews are the place where people are like least. I
Yeah.
remember one time I interviewed for a job in journalism, and like the editor was like, "Oh, you're from Dallas. You know, I used to read the Dallas Morning News all the time," and I like literally got so scared about saying anything that might upset the apple cart of the interview that I just like thought for a moment, and I was like, yeah, the Dallas Morning News," and then stopped talking. And like it was so awkward, and I was like, why did I say it? Like I just like couldn't. I was so afraid of sharing anything about myself that I just said the last word that he said.
Yeah, that's so funny because I have a story also, but I did the opposite of you, which is I was interviewing, I was a baby academic, I was on the academic job market, and the way the academic job market works, it's this giant conference and all the universities rent a suite or a room, and all the candidates go every hour to a different room and give their pitch. And I think they still do it this way. I know it's like massive, sounds HR violation, right? You go into some of the less fancy schools have just normal rooms. You go in and there's like two men clothed, but with their shoes off on a bed. Like it's just very bizarre. Like it's very bizarre. But this isn't a Me Too story, fortunately. Instead, so I was interviewing for a really fancy school, and they had a suite, and I go in, and a long time ago I was a ballet dancer, which is on my resume, and I sit down and I'm clearly really nervous. And one of the faculty, one of the people interviewing me, he senses that, and just like yours, he's like trying to find something commonality or something to talk about, and he says to make me feel more at ease, and he says, "Oh, I see you were a ballet dancer." He also was a little bit portly, I should say. "I see you were a ballet dancer." I was too. And in that moment, what I did, and it was just a tick, a nervous tick, I went like this, cocked my head, and said, "Clearly." And it was like in one word, one unfiltered blurt, like poof. my job was gone, or so I thought. And so, like, that was definitely, like, something I never like, it was like I had poured gasoline all over myself and lit a match, and I was like, "What did I do?"
Wait, was he a ballet dancer though?
No, no, he wasn't. He was just, like,
Okay. I
trying to make me he was, like, making a joke, kind of.
feel like you kind of got the joke though then, right?
Yeah, I did, but it was a very conservative, buttoned up crowd. So the way
Okay.
I could tell it was not like they were like, "Who is this devil woman?" And so, but a few days later, I got a phone call, and it was Harvard. That the interview was with Harvard Business School, and I got the job. And what they said to me, they said, "You know, when you sassed him like that, we thought you'll fit right in here." And so it was like in the moment, they thought they were like, "Who is this devil woman?" But then they also admired me, appreciated me, or whatever. And so my point is one, the social feedback you get is not the whole picture, right? I just got the negative. The
Mhm.
benefit was kind of delayed. Someone can find you cringy and admire you. And then it just was like, even though it wasn't planned, it feeds this point about how sometimes showing a bit of your side, maybe a bit of your sassy side, it can be helpful in measure.
I feel like my whole brand is like people find me cringy yet they admire me. That's a great story. Thank you. Great. Okay, so your book is revealing. When does it
Hmm.
come out?
February 24th.
Awesome. Yeah. And where can people buy it?
Amazon, anywhere, any bookseller. You can go to proflesliejohn.com and all the sellers are available there.